Hello Zero Books readers, it's me again, Douglas Lane, and in this video I'll be considering the difference between socialism and social democracy. I think it's an important distinction to make in this political moment when socialism is on everyone's lips and appears to be on the rise. And we'll take a look at Anselm Jappe's book, The Writing on the Wall, in order to clarify our options.
According to the dictionary, social democracy is a socialist system of government achieved by democratic means. While socialism is a political and economic theory of social organization which advocates that the means of production, distribution, and exchange should be owned or regulated by the community as a whole. But these dictionary definitions aren't really adequate. They leave out the history of social democratic politics and theories. They overlook how socialism grew to be associated first with Karl Marx and then with the Soviet Union, and they ignore how social democrats broke with socialists in Germany and Russia. In order to get a better understanding of the difference between a Marxist version of socialism and what's called social democracy, let's start with an essay entitled Marxism versus Social Democracy, written by the revolutionary socialist Béla Kun, who was, for a short time, the leader of the First Hungarian People's Republic in 1919, and who managed to take power in Hungary by forming a coalition government with the Social Democratic Party, only to later be held responsible for the failure of an attempted revolution in Germany, and then, in the 30s, to be executed as a Trotskyist during the Great Purge. Kun wrote the following, quote, "The most dangerous falsification of Marx has not been open revisionism, but the defense of Marxism by the Marxian center under the leadership of that driest of pedants, Karl Kautsky, Pope of the Second International. This defense consisted in the abandonment of the most important theoretical positions of Marxism in favor of the revisionists. And this was being done primarily on the issue which the revisionists put metaphysically as reform or revolution." End quote. But what did Kun think Kautskyite defenders of Marx were abandoning? It's not easy to say. Kun lists key ideas from Marx without fully explicating them. Today, for the majority who are unfamiliar with Marx's theories, the mention of Marx's law of economic motion, for example, would barely register as a buzzword. But for those sectarians who are familiar with Marx's theories on the commodity, on value, on price, on capital accumulation, and the rest, the likelihood that Kun's conception of these categories is in accord with their own is minimal.
Say, could you tell me what... Yes, comrade. Nothing, never mind.
The truth is that to interpret Marx today requires wading through a complicated and bloody history. However, it's not impossible. We can, for instance, come to some understanding by reading what Marx actually wrote. And in this case, we can try to examine the terms from Marx that were perhaps the point of dispute between socialists and social democrats around the time of the failed German and Russian revolutions.
Nothing must stand in the way of the onward march of democracy. You have another one of your questions, Comrade Riachi?
Yeah. Just what do you mean by democracy, Miss Krauss?
Well, we mean rule by the people. What else?
Rule by all of the people?
Of course.
Well, then, what do our textbooks mean by dictatorship of the proletariat? Dictatorship by one class ain't democracy.
Those things would all be clear to anyone with a proper attitude.
But the truth don't change according to somebody's attitude.
There's only one kind of truth. That is the Communist Party truth as seen by Marx, Lenin, and Stalin.
The purpose of the dictatorship of the proletariat, once established, was to first suppress the bourgeois state and then to manage the needs of the proletariat as they took hold of, developed, and transformed the, quote, mode of production, end quote. Marx wrote that after labor has become not only a means of life, but life's prime want, after the productive forces have increased with the all-around development of the individual, and all the springs of cooperative wealth flow more abundantly, society would be run in accordance to this maxim: from each according to his ability, to each according to his needs. In such a situation, the role of the so-called dictatorship of the proletariat would cease to be political and become technical. The role of the state would be to oversee the shipment of goods, to facilitate communication, to assist in the organization of production. In the Soviet Union, no such transformation took place. How could Kant champion Marx's ideas from within that Soviet Union when Lenin, his economists such as Preobrazhensky, and then Stalin all had to admit that the law of value, and with it capitalist production, was still in effect? How did he manage to side with Marx and his theories when doing so meant risking siding with Mensheviks and other deviationists who argued that the Soviet Union itself was merely a form of state capitalism, and thus Bolshevik party members were no more revolutionary than the old Lassalleans, who had also argued for a slow transition to socialism through the implementation of state policies? How could he have watched 10 and then 20 years pass after the revolution, 10, then 20 years, when the state was not dismantled as Marxist theory suggested was necessary, and not suspect that somewhere along the line, the opportunity to obtain socialism had been missed? There were some people in the Soviet Union who at least tried to imagine what the transformation of the means of production could lead to. In a recent conversation with the working class artist Terry Tapp, he told me about one of them, a composer named Arseny Avramov. Avramov wanted to create music with factories, and he wrote music that was meant to be performed on industrial instruments and on an industrial scale. His symphony with sirens, for instance, created a great noise that, if history had worked out differently, might have announced the arrival of socialism.
And I worry that this idea of a symphony of factories might seem a little abstract and utopian. I think about what the revolutionaries from the past, those people who really struggled, might think about this idea. What would Lenin say if he could hear me now? Would he call me an infant?
Of course, Lenin vehemently opposed the social democratic tendency that formed around Karl Kautsky after 1914. But what was the basis of this disagreement? It was, I think, mostly a tactical disagreement. That is, a disagreement about what sort of activity was permissible, whether the suspension of bourgeois law was tolerable, whether the imperative to maintain democracy in socialist organizations precluded the use of revolutionary violence, and so on. But both Kautsky and Lenin seem to have lost sight of the need for the workers to transform the mode of production first, to take material power up for themselves first. They both ended up believing that socialism could be achieved even as labor continued to be exploited, even as commodity production dictated the terms of social life. And today, every Leninist points to the Critique of the Gotha program to justify this position. But in the Gotha program, Marx wrote that socialism would be, from the start, a cooperative society based on common ownership of the means of production, within which the producers would not exchange their products, and just as little would the labor employed on the products appear there as a value of those products. If the goal was to implement a new phase of capitalist production, a socialist phase of it, why bother with revolution? Regardless of whether radical socialists take Marx to be advocating for a socialist state, he wasn't, or whether they think that socialism requires a radical break and change in not only our political institutions but also our material or productive relations, it does. There is another difference between radical socialists of both types and social democrats. In today's moment, when there is no revolutionary workers' movement to speak of, when the idea of revolution seems both antiquated and like something out of a fairy tale, radical socialists don't have a political project of their own, while social democrats do have a political project. In his book, The Writing on the Wall, the Zero Books author Anselm Jappe argued that far from the lack of a politics being a problem, socialists today need to accept that they don't have a political project and realize that this is what makes their efforts radical. He said, quote, "Faced with this desire to play the game, and almost always as a representative of some interest, movements and moments of radical opposition that embraced anti-politics should be recalled, from the historical anarchists to the artistic avant-gardes, and the continuous state of insubordination in Italian factories during the 1970s.
It seems to me that this desire to escape from the game, to develop a path through anti-politics and resistance, is no longer really tenable in this age of Trump. Even if we don't agree with the policies and the platforms of the Social Democrats, even if we think the Social Democrats don't go far enough, aren't material enough, we should remember that the history of Marxism was fought within social democratic parties. And with the rise of these new social democrats, we may have a stage on which to fight them again.
Thanks for watching this Zero Books video. If you enjoyed it, subscribe to this channel and click on the notifications bell so that you'll be alerted whenever we release a new video. You should also consider supporting us on Patreon. Our patrons get access to our Inside Zero Books podcast every week and can get access to the Zero Books Book Club and help us to continue making online content from the left.